Scary Scrapers. That's what this one's about. That title kind of cracks me up, but basically got that name from Dave Schweitzer of D-Way Tools after our most recent Oregon Wood Turning Symposium, which was in March of 2017. Fun event if you can get to it. We run it every other year, so the other year is down in Arizona with our Desert Wood Turning Roundup. But I was chatting with Dave after the show, and he mentioned that yeah, there are a couple people who came by the booth and said, you know, what that crazy old hippie's doing over there with scrapers is just downright scary. And I embellished that a little tiny bit, but my first reaction, of course, is like, oh, come on, people, it's just a scraper. And I have to ponder things for a while. You know, it's like, you know, Pinky, are you pondering what I'm pondering? I think so, Brain. Animaniacs was great, but yeah, okay, Reed, yeah, back to Scary Scrapers. Sometimes I was thinking that's just like, you know, well, maybe that's like when somebody says skew chisel to you. I'm not bad with the skews. I'm okay with them. They don't scare me anymore. Other tools work better for me, and no, I'm never going to do a skew chisel video, but I've changed my approaches a little bit to how I use scrapers and figured this was about a good time as any to run a Scrapers #2 video. I'm guessing that the biggest problem most people have with using scrapers is they just don't know how to do it right. Two biggest problems they run into with them is size. Size matters. Bigger is not always better. And the other part is leaning way too far out off the tool rest. Ironically, these are the exact same problems that you run into when you're using gouges. There was a recent really long thread on Sawmill Creek all about scrapers. One turner by the name of Bob Price commented that he had a big old scraper that he used to call Mr. Grabby, which I thought was pretty humorous, and since then Mr. Grabby has been converted into a negative rake scraper. Things we hear is that scrapers are self-feeding. I've never noticed that. As near as I can tell, the grabby nature of scrapers comes not so much from the tool, but from how you're working it, how hard you're pushing. It depends a lot on the wood. Basically, if you're getting too much metal into the wood at one time, that's going to make it grabby. If you're turning really dry wood, hard woods, it's going to feel grabby, but that's mostly because when you're turning hard, dry woods, you go much slower, you take off smaller shavings, and that's the exact same thing you do when you're using gouges. These are the two biggest scrapers I have. I don't use either of them anymore for anything other than shear scraping. 1 3/8 wide, 3/8 inch thick. That's just too much metal for me to stick out there over the tool rest. I've seen scrapers that are 1/2 inch thick, 1.5 inches, 1 3/4 wide, and I really scratch my head about those, and people say, oh, it adds to the stability, you get less vibration, and my opinion on that is you move the tool rest closer, you don't have the vibration, and again, with the bigger tools, that's a bigger chance of getting way too much metal into the wood at one time. This one, 3/4 wide, 1/4 inch thick. This would be fine on a mini lathe, but the 1/4 inch is just too thin. I do tend to get a little bit more chattering with it, but that's more because I'm trying to hang out too far off the tool rest. On a mini lathe, this would be fine. So these are kind of in the middle. All 4 of these. 1 inch wide, that's all you need. I can install my 3 horsepower Robust American Beauty with it, no problem. This one's 5/16 thick. These are Doug Thompson's tools. This is a D-Way tool. This is the M42 high speed steel. This one is 5/32 thick. For whatever reasons, the M42 is only available in 1/4 inch. They go to 5/32 and they go up to 3/8, which is a little bit too thick for me. My main go-to tool, the Big Ugly. This is 5/16 or so thick, 1 inch wide. Basically, this is what I do almost all of my bull roughing with. The metal on this is a little bit coarser than the steels. Doesn't leave as smooth of a surface, but that depends as much on the wood as anything else. Now for profiles, a round nose, if you're only going to get one scraper, The round nose, you can go right or left, and you can shear scrape to the right or the left or the inside or the outside of the bowls with it. My favorite profile is more of this quarter round, so this is almost straight across here, and then it rounds over this way, so I can do plunge cuts with a straight, and this is great for inside and outside of bowls. Okay, so this was one musical instrument that I actually obtained some fair degree of competency with, but this also deals with tool vibration. So minimal overhang, you're not getting any vibration at all. You start going out a little bit further, tiny bit. Right there you can hear it banging a little bit. This is the point to where if it's starting to do that on your tools when you're beginning, you'll keep going a little bit further just to see how far you can go before it catches. But this is the point for me to where I move the tool rest, and if it gets out to where it's doing this, that's trouble range. That's where you get big nasty catches, grabs the tools, yanks it out of your hands. So applying that ruler twanging thing here to scrapers, this is one of my big scrapers. This far out, I'm not going to get any twang, any vibration. I get out this far, probably not. I start getting out this far, I start getting a little bit wide cutting surface. The lever starts getting longer. If I'm reaching out this far, basically that's going to try to yank it right out of my hands. So the other side of that, this is a hollowing tool, has a little bitty tip on the end like that. So this is designed basically so you can reach out a lot further depending on how much handle you have behind it. There's going to be very little cutting pressure on the tip, so it makes it a lot easier to control, and you're not getting much of that twang action. This is another variation of a scraper called the Oland tool after Nude Oland. He has since passed, but it's kind of a combination between a hollowing bit and a bowl scraper. Basically, the reputation of this was that it was almost impossible to catch, and that's mostly because you have a very small cutting tip on a fairly stout bar, and this basically inserts into the bar. You have a small cutter. You can hang out a lot farther with this, but still if you hang out too far, it's going to start vibrating and you will get a catch with it. So part of this really long thread on Sawmill Creek about scrapers, somebody brought up Stuart Batty's videos. Stuart and I do things considerably different. One of the things Stuart states is for handle length to how much you have hanging over is about an 8-to-1 ratio. So if you got an inch hanging over, you need 8 inches back here. So if you had 3 inches, you need a 24-inch handle. That's a good kind of ballpark range. It's not exact. It varies a lot depending again on whether the wood's hard or soft or dry or wet and how big of a whack you're trying to take at one time. And the other part of that was how you hold the tool. My preference is for holding it like this. Stuart's preference is for holding it like this. He says that basically this is more controllable and you've got a longer lever here and makes it more stable. And my way of looking at this is a longer lever here, but then you've got a hinge or bend point right in the middle of it. So if it do get a big catch, it's going to want to bend rather than holding it rigid and solid. My preference for this way, if that's underneath my forearm, it's going to just about have to lift me off the ground to get that to move. It works, and I think the biggest difference in the way Stuart and I approach this is most of his turning style is developed to going on a long bed lathe. So I'm at a short bed lathe here. I will be standing right here like this turning. I don't have to bend over a single bit. So if I'm on a long bed lathe, especially when turning the inside of the bowl, it'll be very difficult for me to hold it like this because then I'm going to have to bend over. It works a little bit better holding it out this way. Basically you have easier access to it. And then again, this is one of those ones where his 8-to-1 ratio would probably be pretty good. You want to take little bites going back and forth, and just makes it a little bit easier to hold this stable. For scrapers, in about 99% of the cutting that I do with them, they cut with a burr. It doesn't make any difference whether it's a hollowing tip, a bowl scraper, or a bowl coring tool. The question is, what kind of burr do you want on them? My preference, especially with the coming of the CBN grinding wheels, 180 grit CBN grinding wheel, leave you a burr that I can do a lot of heavy duty roughing with. It also works great for shear scraping. You can hand burnish a burr, and I talk a little bit about this on my sharpening video. Just a brush or two with a carbide rod on it, that works. There is a Lee Valley Veritas burnishing tool which you screw down to your bench top. The only problem with that one, basically you do want to just barely kiss the bevel on that. You don't want a whole lot of pressure on it. If you really crank on it, you're going to get a huge burr, and that huge burr is going to want to catch where the smaller burr won't catch as much. So before we start cutting, tool rest height is important. When you're turning the outside of the bowl, you want to be turning at or below center. If you're turning above center and you get a catch, it digs right into the wood and you get twice as big of a catch. If you're working at center height or a little bit below, if you get the catch, first thing that happens is it falls right out of the wood. So that's a safety sake always when you're working the outside, at or below center. I will be wearing a face mask now for all my videos. It's a good idea. Safety thing for me, still my primary number one step in being safe when turning at the lathe is standing out of the line of fire. It will protect you pretty good from shavings. You get a chunk of bark like this, it's not going to destroy the helmet, bounce off, not too much of a problem. But if you get a chunk like this, that infamous one that stuck on my wall and off my big lathe, if this hits you, you're still going to go down, and that's my number one reason for saying please stand out of the line of fire when you turn. Yeah, before I even turn the lathe on, I will check out the bowl blank, mostly looking for cracks or defects in the wood. This one's got a little bit of cracking up here. That is just on the surface, so I'm not going to worry about that. And as uneven as this blank is, that will turn out anyway. And with all the turning, especially when you're starting off with a new piece or something, brings to mind some words from a martial arts instructor I had. Appetizer first, main course second. With martial arts, it's a distraction technique, and then you put the big whammy on them. And with the wood turning, basically the appetizer first, you take small bites, basically get a feel for what the wood and stuff is doing, or how the blank is turning, and you do that before you start aggressively turning, so hopefully you can avoid the big whammy or the big catch. Yeah, getting ready to turn here. If you notice, this is a very uneven piece of wood. So in order to avoid the big whammy, I'm not going to start out here, which some people like to do. I'm going to start in the center. It's moving a lot more slowly. So if you do get a catch, it's not going to be anything big and spectacular. And then what I do as I come out, I'll pivot and do that all the way out to the edge rather than trying to take a single sweep all the way across.
You got me nervous that I'm in the line of fire. I'm out of it, aren't I?
You're out of the line.
Okay.
We should put that in the film. Not quite down to flat there, so I'll take another pass just to get that down there. And if you notice when I'm using the scraper never really comes out of the wood. When you're using a gouge, you usually push, come back, push, and come back. So flame on again. Okay, now to true up the sides, I do a straight plunge cut down the side. I'll start off with a little bit bigger shaving here, and by the time I get down to the end there, I'll be much smaller shaving. that pretty much has the outside all trued up. That's close enough for now. And I always turn the lathe off for this step so I don't have to cross the line of fire. So again, I'm going to do another plunge cut down here. That basically just trues up this face. So now the blank is pretty much trued up. Got rid of most of that crack in there. I can turn the speed up, and now it's time to rough out the rest of that. Still have that crack there. When I turn the top side of it, I'll probably take it all the way down to there, but for now I'm just going to be roughing. Flatten out an area for the bottom of it, and then start coming down the sides, and again that'll be all pivoting. I'm not going to start at the bottom and come back to the top. And standing out of the line of fire again. I'm pretty happy with that shape. I am going to knock this down, or put a lip there so I know where I'm going to be stopping my bowl shape. That looks good. At this point, all the roughing has been done on the bowl, and next step would be a finish cut with a gouge. And when I'm looking to see the shape of the bowl here, rather than standing directly in the line of fire, I'm kind of looking over the edge like this. It gets it pretty close. But then from this point, basically that's one pass with a gouge, maybe two passes, and the outside surface is done. One other cut I can do with scrapers. I don't do this all the time. It does work, but this is a bevel rubbing cut. That leaves a fairly good surface. So with my roughing done, yeah, it's a little bit rough. That's because it's a roughing cut. Theoretically, one pass, maybe two or three down the outside with a gouge, and it's finished. So that's pretty much finished. Usually I'll touch this up with a shear scraper or something. If you can see where it's a little bit lighter colored right here, depending on how the light reflects or refracts off it, that is tear out. It's very minimal, and for reasons unknown to me, this particular myrtlewood log has been being real nasty about tear out. When I'm doing this plunge cut down the outside of a bowl blank, when it's still pretty rough and all, definitely taking wider shaving here, very small shaving out there, but this is where this straight edge and the quarter round works better. Basically, it makes it easy to keep it right on the edge. And If I use the round nose gouge to do that, that round nose shape kind of pushes it away from the edge, so it makes it hard to get that plunge cut all the way down. So first, set the tool rest height. So on the outside of the bowl, you want to be cutting at or below center, because if you get a catch, it's going to fall out. So on the inside of the bowl, it's just the opposite. You want to be above center. So I get a catch here, this will fall out. So if you're cutting below center and you get a catch down here, it digs in twice as deep and you get the big whammy. So first step, set the tool rest height. Generally I'll start at, that's 50 RPM. I can put it against there. That's not going to do too much damage. And I'd rather have it just a hair high. And if it's too high, then I can angle down. And what I'm going to be doing is I'll probably start in the center again, take out all this rough part, smooth across the top here, round over the rim so I don't slice and dice myself, and then start working by the rim and working my way on down in. And again, it's going to be all pivoting rather than push to the bottom, come back to the top, push to the bottom, come back to the top. Now at this point, I am totally done with having a scraper anywhere near this rim. Main reason is, you can see these little marks right here. One beginning turner was commenting about, yeah, my bowl made this strange screeching and howling sound and then it blew up. So what happens is you don't have much mass here, and a scraper does put a little bit more pressure on the walls, and then it starts to wobble a little bit, and it can wobble to the point that it basically digs in and catches and explodes. So I'm done with the scraper up here. Finish hollowing out the rest of the bowl. Time to move the tool rest a little bit closer so it doesn't start twanging on me. Now, funny thing about this, you get the same problem with catches with gouges as you do with scrapers, and I think this is a primary reason for really digging in on the inside of a bowl, and that's in the transition area. I'm not all the way down to the bottom, but what happens with a scraper is as you're pulling across the bottom, here I'm cutting with just a little bit of the outside there. If I come across here, all of a sudden I've got almost this whole edge into the wood. So that's part of why I come down like this, and then I'll come down like this, come back and forth, or if I'm coming into that transition, I will pivot just so I can avoid of getting way too much metal into the wood. And this is one of those things that you learn to feel it. So beginners are going to tend more to get stuck in there, and once you're experienced with it, you'll feel it's like, oh, it's starting to get a little bit twangy, it's starting to grab, change your tool presentation. Ooh, nice pretty burl there. So check to make sure I don't go through the bottom. 8.5 inches, put that 8.5. I've still got about 5/8 of an inch. Now I was maybe hanging a bit farther off the tool rest than I should have. Move this in basically from this point, take a gouge, take it down, take it through, and that's pretty much finished with the bowl. So at this point I'm at a pretty close to finish depth. A lot of turners, in order to get all the little ripples out across there, will use a standard scraper. Very light sweeping back and forth. This does actually produce a fairly nice cut, fairly smooth surface. When you're going down through the fibers like that, you'll get a lot more tear out, but when you're going parallel to the fiber grain, you don't get nearly as much. But I won't use a standard scraper here. If I'm going to do that cut, I'll use a negative rake scraper. This is a thing I picked up recently. Kind of baffled and befuddled me, but watching Nick Stagg, who's out of Salem area, formerly from the UK or from Great Britain, and he was turning a lamp base, and he hollowed this out with a gouge, but then used a scraper for that and a scraper for his finished cuts here. And with the scraper, he took it and he honed the top and he honed the bevel back and forth a couple times, so basically there's no burr at all on that. And I can't pass this around for everybody to feel it and play with it, but that's about a 220 grit sanding surface there, and it's kind of like, well, how can you do that? The wood used was your Eastern hard rock maple or sugar maple, and so it's a very tight grained, very smooth, even grained wood, and you can get away with that on that type of wood. If I was going to try it on something like poplar or alder or any of the soft maples, I would never be able to get this type of a surface with it, but that's another variation on something you can do with scrapers. Another one of these misconceptions as far as I'm concerned about scrapers is some people say, oh, they don't cut, they scrape. And I'm kind of like, what do you mean? These came from a scraper, these came from a gouge. They look pretty much the same to me other than size. I think scraping cut would be a much better term, because I mean, if it's not cutting, how are you going to get nice long shavings? Okay, yeah, I had to remember to put this thing back on. And I know some of you out there are looking at me going like, oh no, he's not, no, spindles with a scraper. Yep, works pretty good, and I'll blame this on Eric Lofstrom. He started me doing a whole nother exploration bit into peeling cuts, and I thought, well, what happens if you use a scraper for doing this. And I have that engineer syndrome, which I blame on my dad. And if you don't know what that is, that's if it ain't broke, take it apart and fix it anyway. So this is a peeling cut. You start off by rubbing the bevel. You lower it till it starts cutting, and you can go back and forth on it. And again, with the appetizer first, main course second, I'm not going to be taking a full width cut. I'm going to start on the edge and nibble my way in, and standard peeling cut procedure. Rub the bevel. And if I want to finish that. That leaves a pretty decent surface. Also, if you're doing spindles and you want to do the pommel cut, that can be done. And that's really about the same quality on that type of cut that I can get with a skew chisel. So again, I'm not any kind of a skew master, but this is a great tool for doing the peeling cuts. And I was worried when I first started doing them that what happens if I do just a straight scraping cut. It still works, and I would think there would be a big whammy type catch, and there's not. And the main reason I can figure for that happening, very short overhang, very short diameter of turning as compared to if you did it on a bowl. You have much bigger diameter and a higher foot per minute speed of the wood passing over the cutting edge, but it does work. If there is a disadvantage to using scrapers on bowls for your primary roughing tool, I guess that comes more from particularly the beginners. You need to practice to develop your gouge skills, because that's your good cleanup tool. It works, but this, it can't be beat for efficiency for roughing, especially for production work. And one of those Kodak moments that, sits in my head forever. The picture is down at the Atlanta Symposium, went to the Woodworkers Emporium booth so I could play on a Vic mark, because I'd never done that before. And Stuart Batty and Christian, don't know his last name, were standing behind me, and I could see Stuart with his eyes kind of like, and he was, doing the same movements that I'm doing, and he'd never seen that before. So I do tend to think outside the box. It does work. It's not the one size fits all type thing will solve every single solution, and again, that depends on the wood and the tools and the day and wet and hard and dry wood and all that. And I guess the only other comment left for scrapers are the Carbide Tip Scrapers. Very popular tools, and I figure part of their popularity is you've got a pretty small cutting surface compared to what you have for most of your scrapers, and so your chances of getting too much metal into the wood at one time are far less than if you're using a big, 1.5-inch, 2-inch wide scraper. So I think that's about all for now. This will probably be the last video in this shop. I've got a couple more in the works. I definitely need to do one on negative rake scrapers. I want to do one on inside the bowl cuts again. That's one that keeps coming up on the forums. Not going to do a skew chisel one. And if you have anything in particular you'd like to see me try to tackle for turning videos, please let me know. Oh yeah, one more thing. Scrapers are fine on basically your standard bowls, utilitarian bowls, but anything that's got an interrupted edge like this or a natural edge, I won't use the scrapers out here till I get down to about this point. Basically it will tear out on the edges, and if you got bark on there it will pull that off, but for your standard bowls. It can't be beat for heavy duty roughing.